So that's why when I decide to come, I decide like what will be my presence and how will I design my presence, because I don't want to be in spaces that I have to be devalued in any way or have to confront people in any way. I already did that. So my sons laugh because they say I create my worlds. Yeah, I create my worlds.
Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Boriken podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquest and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmin Hernandez, creator of Cucubanacion, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Boriken.
With this episode, I share my first ever interview done for the Rematriating Boriken project. And that interview was of Marta Moreno Vega, who in my life and in so many other lives has served as such como un faro de luz, right? Like just the example of her leadership, of her wisdom. When I first heard Marta speak, for me, it was like, oh my God, this is the truth. Black, Boricua, Yoruba priestess, artist, scholar, educator, curator, institution builder, activist, born and raised in El Barrio, East Harlem, second director of El Museo del Barrio, founding director of the Association of Hispanic Arts, founder of the Caribbean Cultural Center, African Diaspora Institute, creator of the Creative Justice Initiative, co-founded Corredor Afro together with Doctora Maricruz Rivera Clemente and Galeria Ori in Santurce. Back in 2021 was when this interview was recorded, that we had virtually with me in Aguada, she in her home in Loíza, on Zoom, like so many people were doing back during the pandemic shutdown. It was using virtual tools to move forward with a project that, like so much, had been brought to a screeching halt by the pandemic. So with this, I share this very necessary reflection from Marta Moreno Vega, and hope you enjoy.
Why do you believe people are so reluctant to move here and to, whether it's returning here or whether it's moving here for the first time? Like, what are some of your experiences or that you've heard as to why people are afraid?
I don't know that people are afraid. I think that for the most part, I think it's that you sort of get accustomed to living in your space. And I think that the reality is, we're first generation, second, maybe third generation. And for the most part, that conversation of returning home was not had by my parents. I mean, like, I know that a lot of other cultural groups, people are talking about, oh, we're returning home. We're getting money and returning home, right? We're working here for the moment. My parents were very clear they weren't coming back. Okay. And why, I never understood, but I later on figured out that my dad had a third grade education. I seeing Loíza, must have gone through, seeing it now in 2021. And I can only imagine what it was for him in the 20s, right? My dad was born in 1904. So I can only imagine the lack of everything, right, that was here for him, right? My mom was able to graduate high school and went to New York because she wanted to be a nurse. There was no nursing program here. So that's why she goes to New York. But both of them were very clear, we're Puerto Rican. And, our house was a blaze of Puerto Rican color, you know what I mean? And Puerto Rican plastic furniture and everything. but I never heard that conversation of wanting to come back. I think that when I graduated NYU, my undergrad, I remember that I was like, okay, you all say I'm Puerto Rican. Okay, so I want to go to Puerto Rico. I want to see what it means to be Puerto Rican, right? And I bought 2 tickets because I was already working as a teacher. And I said, well, I'm going. And my father was like, you're not going anywhere. I said, señorita, you're not going anywhere. You're going with somebody. We're going to figure out who's going with you, right? And then it turned out to be my mom, because my sister didn't know anything. She was born in New York, like I was born in New York. She had never been to Puerto Rico. My sister-in-law, Melody's mom, had just had Chino. So my mom was the one that had to come with me. And I remember that, like, when she got here, my uncle was the one that received us in Caguas. And everything she remembered was no longer there. So the other reality is, that many of our people who left early have a vision of Puerto Rico and have taught their children a vision of Puerto Rico that no longer is. So when my uncle, me recuérdate, Flora, que aquí está, no me recuerdo. Recuérdate de este edificio, no, ese no es eso, you know what I mean? And it was even so funny because there was this man walking with un bastón, and my uncle tells my mother, ¿quién es ese? And she looks, from a distance, she says, no recuerdo, el primer novio tuyo. And she just cracked up, She just cracked up. But her disconnect was so great because she had not been back in like 30 years.
Oh, wow.
When I brought her. So, like, I think that a lot of it too is that distance, right? I think you have the memory, but you don't have the actuality of what it is.
Wow. I would have never guessed, Marta, that your first trip to Puerto Rico was in your 20s then.
I just turned 20.
The force that you become in this community and that connection that you establish, even with that disconnect. And the other thing you just helped me realize, because I'm first generation too, my parents were born in Ponce, is that our parents were so connected, right? That not connected, but they just arrived in New York. So how can you just arrive and talk about leaving? I came into this conversation and overlooked that point. Like if you just made this long journey, the last thing you want to talk about is packing up and leaving again on that journey. So understanding why our generations were about setting roots in New York, that's something that...
It was very hard because remember, it depending on the education, depending on, like my dad was, how would I say, probably the typical Puerto Rican of that time. Your wife didn't work. The man was the boss of the house. He worked. He was like, macho man, right? In terms of, we were very clear in our house that we were Puerto Rican. I mean, there was never a doubt that we weren't Puerto Rican. Our food, the paintings in the house, the paintings on the wall, Pepto-Bismol pink, and all of these colors were part of our reality. And we were clear we were Puerto Rican. And my parents, and I think that was because of my dad, were very clear that we were Black. So that before Black was beautiful, my dad was like, somos negros. Ustedes son negros, son puertorriqueños, no son negros americanos, son negros puertorriqueños, So I was always very clear that I was Black and Puerto Rican. Whatever that meant, I knew I was it. You know what I mean? So, I mean, it's later, right? As you grow up to develop the identities and learning about, racism and everything. But like growing up, I was very clear I was a Black Puerto Rican. And my mom was very clear. She was like, your complexion, my mom. Her dad was, I understand, very Black. And her mother was very light skinned. So she was very clear she was Black.
One of the questions that I had too that I'm asking of people is that now that, you've been working here constantly. You know, like even when you're not here, you're still here. And so my question, because I think some of us get shocked by this experience, is what have been your observations around the differences and similarities of race dynamics and colorism and prejudice, how they work out in the US versus here in Puerto Rico, how that shows up here in Puerto Rico?
I just asked that question of Pepón Osorio because he's going to do a conversation for us. And I think he's right on point. I think that here there's a sort of nicety of talking about racism. In the States, or at least my experience in New York City, right, which is primary, it's harsher. It's more direct. It's more apparent. But here, there's this sort of classiness, if you will, nicety, way of saying things that are just as cutting, but are set nicely. So instead of wanting to turn around and smack somebody, you know what I mean? You sort of like, well, she's really a nice person. Maybe I shouldn't smack her yet. You know what I mean? But my yardstick is you need to look at where our people are in the structure of things. And that tells you how people are seen and or not seen and how they're treated, right? Or not treated. So that our African descendant peoples are at the bottom of the ladder as they are in New York and as they are in the States. So that racism works the same way and has the same results. That you're stabbed with a knife, or if you're stabbed with a razor blade, you know, you're still cut, you're still hurt, and you're still hurting, and your position in the society is determined by those actions.
I agree with you about the niceties, and sometimes there are these microaggressions because of the way they're delivered, right? That if you got them delivered in a more blatant way, you would react differently. A veces uno se queda confundido. Wait, did this person just try to play me? And then you got to kind of sit with it.
Yeah.
There's also that part of wanting to come open, wanting to be accepted and love everybody because you're in your homeland. That when those things happen, it kind of catches you off guard. I think that there's an element of not feeling as guarded as I might be when I'm in other places in the States, you know?
Everybody here knows everybody. You're almost in the same circles I'm seeing, right? If you're a certain kind of person, you're almost all in the same circles. And I mean, since I was brought up there, you know, I've always felt my circle is there. So certain things didn't bother me to the degree that they bother me now. Right? And I'm very vocal and very clear about, you know, how I want to be seen, how I want to be discussed, and where I want to be. But I already come with I guess a reputation and a history. You know what I mean? So I know that I'm treated differently because I'm from there, as opposed to being Daki. You know what I mean? Because even everybody, no, but Daki. I'm very clear que ya no soy, todavía no soy de aquí. You know what I'm saying? That I carry a certain way of talking and behaving and saying that no es de aquí, you know, and I'm okay with that.
Absolutely. I totally hear that. And that's interesting how it shows up for you versus, say, a person who just got here, got to start from scratch, you know, that even though you're not here, you come from, a lot of people know your name before you walk in the room. And that's a beautiful thing for the work that you do. And it's also very humbling in certain spaces. I think that a lot of people come here and can't assert themselves in certain spaces because they won't be listened to. But I think, and I wonder, do you find that you do come here and people will listen more than they would to the average person, because I've seen a lot of discrediting of people who are labeled as diaspora y que no tienen la capacidad o no tienen la autoridad, mejor dicho, to speak in certain spaces. How has that shown up for you?
Well, I think it's very interesting because I've chosen not to be in spaces and create my own space. Right. I think that the museo for me was probably a life lesson.
Okay. And you saying in Museo del Barrio, not the one
Museo
here.
del Barrio,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Because remember, when we take over the Museo del Barrio, it was basically in boxes. There was no museo, there was no program. It was like we were doing it from scratch, and we had Museo had just moved from a school building in West Harlem to East Harlem. So I was just a public school teacher. So I didn't have any experience at all in building anything or running any program independent of the school system. I was just a teacher. Or not just a teacher. Teacher is to be super respected. But that's what I was. And building the museo was a process of understanding political reality, funding reality, racist reality. It was all of it. It was all of it, awareness of how we were seen as a people, I was seen as a Black woman, a Puerto Rican woman, how I was, what I was creating with everybody else was seen as marginal, not important. And our task was to make us important. Our task was to make us important. And Museo wasn't anything. It was in boxes. Literally in boxes. It had no rep. It had no nothing. And we had to build that, and doing all of that was something you don't learn anywhere. You don't learn it anywhere in the system that we're in. It was incredible, And remember, it was a time that people were bodacious and fearless, So, like when I would see Harlem Studio Museum in Harlem do something, I was like, I could do that, and copy it and go do it. Or, find a way of doing it and so on. So that we were like, we were maroons in New York City,
Oh my goodness.
So that was for me a lesson that allowed me to sort of apply what I learned there to everything else I did.
There's so many things you're saying that just, oh my God, open up a whole other treasure box to unpack, to open and sort through. And we were maroons in New York City. That was humongous. Our task was to make us important, to have to be the pioneers of that and be seen and heard. And then you bring that back here, because here there's so much. I think one of the worst things I see here that's so painful, and we see it everywhere, but the way it shows up here almost ubiquitously is the self-loathe, right? So that process of coming back and having done this work over there, and then coming back here, and it's almost this process of reminding people how amazing we are based on the institutions you created there. Do you find
but remember, I don't come back. This is like I've been going back and forth since El Museo, right? Remember that in 1974, we did the exhibition with the Metropolitan Museum. And that was, again, bodacious because the Met had just done Harlem on My Mind. And when I go to see Harlem on My Mind, all of the African-American artists are picketing, including my professor at NYU, Hale Woodruff. He was my visual art professor, right? And I was like, had just started in a museum, just started. And I was like, oh, shoot, a picket of all these artists, right? And Romare Beard and all of them were picketing. I go into the show. I I said, well, I got to see what it is, right? I shouldn't have gone in, but like they were trying to, nobody go in. I go in, and the exhibition is all giant blown ups of Harlem, right? The only artist there was Vandersea, who had long passed. So, a long story short, my thing is, okay, so they're having a Black show, click, click. Why isn't there a Puerto Rican show? Click, click, right? So with I approach Irving McManus, Lowry Sims, the whole process. I come to Puerto Rico when they agree on the concept of 500 years of Puerto Rican art. Because the Met starts with, oh, you can have a show of Puerto Rican artists in the cafeteria wall. I'm like, no, that was their community gallery. Now, remember, we're talking about 1972. So they had like a wall that was the community gallery. And this is, well, you can have an exhibition there. I said, I don't want an exhibition there. I want it in the galleries. No, you can't. I said, I'll bring 1,000 artists to you think you have artists now? I'll bring 1,000. I didn't know anybody. You know what I mean? I didn't know anybody. I'm like, you think you have a lot of people in front? I'll bring you 1,000 people. And con esa, being bodacious and being atrevida and being all of us, we were like bullshitting. We were like, no, we will bring this, and so on and so on. Long story, we do the exhibition, 500 years. I come before the exhibition, I come to find out what objects from Puerto Rico we want in the show. I have made appointments before coming. And when they saw who I was, and remember, I thought I was Angela Davis, so my hair was even bigger, right? All of the appointments were canceled, right? So I go back and bring Henry Gelseller, who's the curator, and Irving McManus, who was the community Latino Puerto Rican liaison or something. So they have to come back with me in order to see the paintings, because people would not allow me into their galleries or allow me into storages or whatever. So I had to go get a white man to come and let me in. So that was my first real confrontation with racism in Puerto Rico. I mean, so when I come to Puerto Rico, all other times I'm clear of the level of racism.
Okay.
I mean, it was like smacked back, Then when the show opens and the people realize that, it's opening, I start getting calls from Puerto Rico, right? Saying, you should open the show at the Metropolitan Museum first, instead of el Museo del Barrio first. And I was like, no, it's opening in el Barrio first. And I got calls from Oriente. Well, I'm going to have them pull the painting of, my great cousin or whatever. I was getting all these calls, harassing calls about having the show at the Met first for the sake of Puerto Rico. And I was like, it's happening in Barrio first. I mean, even Ricardo Alegría, who I got to love, really love for everything he did. Like my first meeting with him, he said, "Lo que están en Nueva York son los fracasados."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, And then we became friends. But that was my first thing with him when I started talking to him about the show. He was like, no, los fracasados son los primeros que están acá. El que pudo embregar en Puerto Rico está aquí. And I was like, bueno, mi papá no era un fracasado ni mi mamá. So yo no sé de qué usted habla. And that was in my bad Spanish. But at any rate, later. So that was the attitude that I confronted everywhere. Carlos Conde, who was a major owner of private collections. I mean, I went to meet with him when I brought Henry Gelseller, all the doors open. So I've confronted this kind of racism all along, with my dealings with Puerto Rico. And that was I guess the line that I understood how deep it was when I came to do that show. So I've had no illusions of racism in Puerto Rico. So that's why when I decide to come, I decide like what will be my presence and how will I design my presence, because I don't want to be in spaces that I have to be devalued in any way or have to confront people in any way. I already did that. So my sons laugh because they say I create my worlds. Yeah, I create my worlds.
That's beautiful. That's powerful. That's
So
so
like,
powerful.
you think you're living in your bubble. I said, yes, I'm living in my bubble. I don't like what's outside my bubble.
Mhm. Having said that, how is it going with El Corredor Afro and seeing that you're doing art exhibitions, but then these community classes around technology, which is also something you were doing with the center back in Harlem, like in East Harlem, talking about technology and bringing this sort of, making sure that our people in our communities have these resources. But how has that been creating your bubble and your world now to share with the people of Loíza or the people of your family lineage?
Bueno, I mean, remember that Corredor is a joint project of Maricruz Rivera Clemente and myself. And I've known Mari for about 15 years, because when I was doing the international CALCI project out of the Caribbean Cultural Center, right, the Global Afro-Latino and Caribbean Alliance, I met her and have been dealing with her. I think that the project for me is a pilot of configuring how a future organization should be built or can be built. I've always felt and verbally stated that museums are the collections of stolen goods. And where they're not, they're the investment of people who are on the board of directors who want to protect their investments. So that these institutions are not necessarily about the art. They're about money and protection of a Eurocentric white supremacist vision. And so, how do you build a cultural institution, an arts institution that reflects the community that it should be serving? Is the project, right? Corredor Afro is how do we connect those experiences that have remained invisible, marginal, that have been devalued, are undervalued, continue to be so even in a period of Black Lives Matter. And how do we create institutions that are, and that I haven't succeeded in, but aren't so beholden to funding, right? In ways that are made to feel us less than. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that government money is our money. It's tax money. So yes, I want government money. I want our tax money. I want that money to return to our communities. But foundations and other people get breaks because they're doing community service or service to the community, right? That's why they don't have to pay taxes. So what I'm saying is that money that you say that you give us, you need to give us. And give us at the level that we give you, right? That break, because we're a numerical majority, right? And as a numerical majority, you're supposed to do it because it's the right thing to do. But since you don't do it because it's the right thing to do, then how do you provide that? Give us back the money that we have invested in this government or invested in this place. And so, I mean, I think that El Corredor for, I think Mari and myself becomes, how do you articulate artistically, culturally, as advocates, a narrative that it's not an ay bendito narrative or, bendito help me. It's like, it's your responsibility and your duty because we have paid you. Mm-hmm. We'll call it reparations if you want to call it reparations, but we continue to invest at a level that we're not getting back our return. So that building within community, I think, reminds you of that continuously. Yes. That we are part of community. We're not apart from community, and our power is the community. Yes. And art is not being brought to the community. It's produced by the community. Right? So that what we're exhibiting is talent that is within our communities. It's not it's not anywhere else. And it has its aesthetic, it has its narrative, it has its vision. And it doesn't become more valuable because it's in the MAC or it's in the Puerto Rico Museum or any other institution. It is just as valuable, if not more so, because it has the heart of the people still in it.
How do we continue to take that love that's inherent in us for who we are, our essence, and create these spaces where we celebrate it and where we teach children that this is worth celebrating, which is why I interned at the Met in high school, but as an adult, I specifically chose to work within Museo and the Studio Museum because I was very clear about wanting to teach as a teaching artist in an institution where the work on the walls represented the children that I was working with, that they could see their experiences validated there. And sort of along those lines, when we last spoke, you had mentioned, this idea that if people were to come back here, or if people were to choose to move to Puerto Rico, how different it would be to get a welcome, to get a call from Puerto Rico mismo, del gobierno, that says, we welcome the people from the diaspora to try to come back, or to come and purchase property, or to try to set up themselves, their families here. And one of the questions I have, and you speaking about that accountability, like this tax money, this is government money that we need back in our communities because this is where it came from. Something that I'm trying to envision is how could we ever hold the government accountable for the way it incentivizes investors, foreign investors, and makes it attractive to tourists. But this disconnect where there's no initiative, there's no incentive to make that connection with Puerto Ricans that live in the diaspora.
But we always have to sort of frame whatever the action is understanding that we're in a colony, right? And what a colony does is rape. That's a job. A colony rapes. That's why it's a colony, right? So that notion that it's not going to rape is wrong. We have to accept that. The definition of a colony is you're controlled by somebody and they're going to rape you for their benefit. So the question is how you stop the rape, right? So you have to contextualize then what is it that stops the rape? And its people have to understand that it's being raped. Puerto Rico is creating laws, right? La 2021 is to invite people to rape. That's what it is. Everybody says, it's inviting millionaires, y otro, yeah. It's inviting white people, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's inviting people to come and rape the island further. We need to use the language that makes it clear to people what is happening, right? If you get a percentage of paying only 4% tax for you to come and rape me, and then you're inviting your own, and you're not giving them that, right, advantage, why would you want to come, right? Why would the government want to advertise to its own people? Because it's not going to give them that 4%. Right? So it's inviting others to rape, but it's not inviting your own to come back. A dog is a dog. You know what I mean? A colony is a colony. And, we don't want to, it hurts us to say it, it hurts us to see it from that, but that's what it is. And that's why it's making these kind of rules. So we have to call on stop the rape.
Mm.
Right? Stop the rape. But then how do you stop the rape when so many of the island people see the rape as beneficial? Right? You see it as beneficial. No, because see, we become part of the United States, we're going to get this and this and this and that. I don't know enough about it, but from what I understand, Hawaii is regretting it. So we have to use Hawaii as an example, right? Now Hawaii is trying, the Hawaiians are trying to reclaim, right, what they no longer own. So the language we have to use, I think, has to be clearer and more precise, right? In terms of what the reality is. And if you have people who are, if they celebrating wanting to be raped, how do you say other? Invite, your own to come back. They don't want us to come back. I mean, that's the reality. They don't want us to come back. Wasn't it Rosselló, one of the statements that they didn't want Puerto Ricans? Wasn't that a statement?
That was one of the issue about Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. Yeah.
So when I think any kind of action has to be that clear, and using those phraseologies and using those terms, because what it's saying is we are selling the island, right? And we're doing it without any kind of hesitation. I mean, I'm telling friends, and I've had it before I decided to move, like when I decided that I was thinking of moving, I was like, yo, make an investment. Puerto Ricans don't have an investment anywhere, right? So that the island should be an investment because you can travel to it anytime. And if it's part of your legacy, check, because your children will have a place to be or come to or feel, some legacy. But ultimately, it's an investment, right? And then, people that could, like professors and people that, at least middle class, would tell me, ay, pero ya no tengo familia. Y yo le digo, what land do you own? No, I don't own any land. So why don't you own land in Puerto Rico? Why are you even thinking of Ghana or whatever? Because you ain't going to go there every month. That's a 13-hour trip. Or in Brazil, that's a 13-hour trip. Puerto Rico is like 3.5, 4 hours. You're going to go there. So why don't you invest? Right? And still, that lack of financial training that we still have as first and second generation, es that mentalidad de pobreza. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, I bought this. I couldn't afford to buy this, but I had dreamed when I was married, we had passed by this, and I thought it was so beautiful being built with this kind of like orangey beige color and everything. I told my husband, I'm gonna live there.
Wow.
And he's like, you're not coming back, isn't it? Yeah, I'm gonna live there.
I did not know this story. I knew the story. I think you told me that it was your book advance, and you said you gave the money to the man, and you said, I'll pay you back or something like that. But I didn't know you dreamt with that place. Or like from back long ago that you had seen.
We came. We used to come to Loisa all the time. We brought Sergio when he was a baby and so on, and they were building this place and this sort of urbanization. And I was telling my husband, we need to come back here. We should buy a house here. It was like, no, let me even go back. I was engaged.
Okay.
And that first trip I came to Puerto Rico, and I wanted to make the trip before getting married. So I brought my mom, like I told you. I invested $1,500 that I had saved for my wedding in a house in Caguas. My mother was like, you're crazy. You gone crazy. And I was like, no, that was, imagínate, I was 20 and better than 50 odd years ago. And I was like, no, we could come here for our vacations. My mother called my fiance then to tell him I had gone crazy. I had invested in a house. And he was ready to jump on a plane to come and get me. And it was like, no, this is beautiful. I had never seen these colors.
Yes.
And I was like, it's a whole other palette. It's like a
Yes.
whole other art palette. I was looking at this as an artist. I was like, these colors don't exist in New York. These colors exist here. Why am I here? Why am I there? It should be here.
I hear that.
Yeah.
I have one last question with all this. It kind of leads into this last question, which is knowing that they would rather not have us here and knowing the challenges and how you opened up that it's hard for Puerto Ricans to be in Puerto Rico. The question I'm asking of people is what sustains your spirit here? Right? Because we know with all the crazies, there's something that sustains us in such a profound way here. What are those things for you, or what are those things that bring you joy that keep you here despite all the madness?
Well, people have been, wonderful. People have made friends with over time. That's one. Have been like so welcoming. That's one. My cousin, mi prima hermana and her husband and her children have been like amazing. We didn't grow up together, but like we were talking the other day when we went to the beach, and she was like, we're like sisters, and we didn't grow up together, but we're like sisters, like, how did we become sisters?
Wow.
And it's true, we're so close. We call each other every morning and in the afternoon if she doesn't hear from me and I don't hear from her. This is funny, but it's real. The other day my lights went out, and I don't know if you saw the post. I said I put my flashlight on the kitchen table, and it was shining up. And I said, I make my own light.
Yes.
And then I said something like, what did I say? I said, I made my own light. So even though I can't make coffee, because I have no electricity, at least I have light, right? So it was a joke, right? My neighbors came with farina and coffee. I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God. And they were like, no, I said, pero ustedes tienen luz. No, no tenemos luz. But they have something. And they make coffee and
they work it out.
I was like, what? I was like, at the same time, I was embarrassed. I was just so filled.
Yeah.
Just so totally filled, because I was like, would this have happened in New York? Right? In a building where everybody, sort of closes down. You see people in the elevator and in the lobby, but you're not like, like that. And they just came over with coffee and oatmeal. And I was like, oh, no, you didn't have to do this. I felt so embarrassed. But then at the same time, I said, how sweet,
right.
How beautiful, how, amazing. Yeah. So all of that, I think that, all of that compensates for things, because I think that I can't deny that being here during this COVID period is a revelation. Because I was just speaking to Gloria. You mentioned Gloria. I was just speaking to Gloria, and I was telling her, I said, like, it has made me grow up with all the age that I have. It has made me grow up. Because being in isolation, away from my family, has been a big thing. I've always been with my kids or with my, with Mel, with, we're all like family. We've worked together and all of this. And I'm like, it has made me grow up, right? It has made me understand me better. It has made me develop a relationship different, right, than I had with my mom. Right, because of technology, because of the distance, because of how this is functioned. But it also has made it clear that life has changed. That life has changed. And that nothing in this world is is stationary, that is alive. And I just read something this morning because like I've been reading a lot of, the patakis of Yoruba tradition as well as the Tao. And it said that anything that is alive is soft and pliable. Anything that is dead is brittle and hard. And that if you become brittle and hard, it's like you're dead. And what this experience being in Puerto Rico has shown me is that flexibility is, okay, so I didn't have water for 2 or 3 horas, or I didn't have light for 2 or 3 hours. What's the deal? What's the big deal? Nothing is a big deal. Life is the big deal.
That's good.
Relating is a big deal. Enjoying your reality is a big deal. So change is part of life. So what Puerto Rico has taught me even more so is to change his life.
Okay. I love all of that. This is the part where I'm like, I wish we had an audience in that. 1,000 people could have heard this whole conversation. Because those are the parts, and these are como los saberes that could sustain us here, right? And that in the day-to-day brega, right? There's that new podcast that uses that term, la brega. Sometimes people get dry and brittle and are not necessarily, all these things break us down. And it's hard because I recognize that some of these things that I'm wanting to celebrate could be a romanticizing, but I've had to find a way to focus on what's sustaining and to focus on that fluidity. Because if I focus only on all those things that we cannot change, then I don't have the power. I lose my power to change what I can, right? To now talk about the serenity prayer. And that's why I asked that question. What's sustaining us here? Because it's not just sustaining to forget. It's sustaining to tap into that power so we do have the capacity to shift it into what we're needing it to shift into. And I think that everything that you just said, this whole conversation gives so much. And
the reality is that we've all become so consumer focused, right? And I think that, all of us feel we're woke and we're this and we're that, but there's a certain level of privilege that we have had that we have abused. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the conversation with Gloria too, right? This morning, because you sort of like, okay, voy a la bodega and buy this, or I'll call and this food will be delivered, or this or that, Right. And I'm not gonna lie, the first couple of months were like, oh shoot, I can't call the Chinese and have food brought, or I can't do this and I can't do that. But then on the other hand, like there began to be a shift, right? It forced me to go out. It forced me to drive. It forced me to do a lot of stuff that I had stopped doing, right? Because of the convenience of just calling, right? It stopped me from venturing out or just being active. And because of certain realities here, there's certain things that I've either developed to do or re-energize myself to do in order to deal with being here, right? And that's the change, right? That you become so kind of molded into your pattern that if you don't shift it, if it doesn't, you don't shift and you don't go with the change and you don't go with the thing, you become static. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to do that in your mind. It's easy to do that with your body. It's easy to do it. And I think that I thought like I hadn't planned to stay on this trip. I was going to go back and get stuff, right? And that was the conversation I was having with my son who kept the apartment. And I was like, I was so convinced that I was going to go back and get all this stuff. I don't need this stuff. So he's like, so what are you going to do with it, Mom? Like I said, when I go back, I'm going to give it to charity. I'm not going to bring it with me. Right? Because I've been a year without it. Why do I need it?
Exactly.
Right? But when I came, I felt I needed all that stuff. I was
Right.
I was making room here so that I could bring my stuff. No.
Yeah.
So like I'm very clear that we also accumulate stuff,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
physical stuff and mental stuff that doesn't take us anywhere.
And it becomes like spiritual clutter. We had that lesson 2 times when we moved into the house in Moca, the day after our mudanza. 2 of our boxes were colonized by termites. They just swarmed around the boxes. And then we had to learn that we couldn't have cartón, right? I'm the one that keeps boxes of papers and archive. I have my archives. Y todo eso eran caja de papeles, which is all stuff that they love. Termites love that stuff. They don't just go after wood. Ellos les gustan cartón y papel. And then there was stuff I tried to salvage, and then the hurricane happened. And when the hurricane happened, I was like, we live on a hill. We're not going to get flooded. I didn't know that rain happens horizontal, and we still got flooded. And a lot of these boxes and papers that still existed in my studio, by the time I realized that they were wet, they had already been molding. So that was my lesson in, if I want to be happy here and at peace here, I have to let go, let go, let go, know what's worth saving. And so I'm glad that you just realized in the course of this year, when we don't get the lessons, this land finds its ways.
Yeah. And I mean, there was like the beginning, it was like really shaky. I was like, oh, I don't know that I can do this. And then it just kept shifting through the year. It just kept shifting, and I kept asking, and I keep asking myself, what is it you value? What is it that you value? Right? And what is it that gives you the feeling of okay, of being okay? And in that thinking process, going to your question is what makes Puerto Rico this moment in my life that I want to be here. Obviously, the weather is part of it. The people are part of it. Creating this project that I didn't come with the idea of creating. We were thinking of creating sort of like what we did with NYU with students and so on and so forth. But then it sort of took a left turn, and it developed into that, but greater than that, right? So I think that also, like I said, change and being flexible to what is needed, not what you want necessarily, but what is needed at the time.
That is correct. Marta, thank you immensely. I know, because we've been on over an hour. I know your son called you. Yeah. I treasure you, and I treasure your experiences and your generosity and sharing, and always giving through your work, through your words, through the things you birth, right? Whether it's projects, institutions, ideas. I'm always so grateful to you for that. And so
we need to be in touch. We're both in the same space, so we need to be in touch more often.
I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch more. Cuídate mucho. Igual. Much love.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
To learn more about Marta's work, you can visit martamorenovega.org. So just a reminder that this interview with Marta, this conversation, was recorded back in 2021. And for that comment I made at the end about this is the part where I wish we had an audience and 1,000 people listening, I'm glad that several years after recording this, started to share some of these conversations via this podcast and that other people can listen. But the reason why I bring back that point about this being recorded in 2021, Marta referencing the changes that we were witnessing as part of the shutdown of the pandemic, is that yet again in 2025, with these crazy administrations in place, both here in Puerto Rico and in the US, presiding in colonial fashion over the administration here, we're seeing these changes. We're feeling this kind of shutdown effect all over again. So I believe that things happen when they are meant to. I think that this conversation is as relevant today as it was back in 2021. I think that the wisdom that Magda brings is always timeless, is always the truth for what we are needing collectively to move forward. And I really hope that listening to this conversation has given you something to sustain you through La Brega, whether here in the archipelago, whether in the diaspora, or wherever you are listening from. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can tune into future episodes every new and full moon when I post them. And for more information about the project Rematriating Boriken, you can visit rematriatingboriken.com. That's rematriating with an M, and Boriken with Ken. And Rematriating Boriken is also on Instagram and Facebook. So you can follow us there. If you like this, please give a like and a share. If you want updates for future posts, subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And thank you again so much for listening. In light always. This is Yasmin.